The autumn wind carried dust and dried leaves through the narrow streets of Cedar Ridge, a town that had seen better days. Population barely scraped 300 souls, most of them miners, ranchers, or folks who'd given up on finding anything better elsewhere. The sun hung low over the distant mountains, painting everything in shades of rust and gold. Samuel "Sam" McKenna rode into town on a horse that looked as weathered as he did. Both man and beast bore the marks of countless miles through unforgiving terrain. Sam's face, partially hidden beneath a week's worth of stubble and the shadow of a worn leather hat, told stories of 40-odd years lived hard. Deep lines etched around gray eyes spoke of squinting into too many sunrises, while the permanent downward turn of his mouth suggested he'd forgotten how to smile somewhere along the trail. His clothes were practical rather than presentable. Deerskin jacket patched in several places. Canvas pants faded to the color of desert sand. Boots that had walked through more states than most folks could name. Everything about him whispered of a man who belonged to the mountains and endless sky rather than any civilized place. The horse's hooves clattered against the wooden planks as they passed the general store. "Where Mrs.?" Henderson swept her porch with unnecessary vigor, eyeing the stranger with the suspicion reserved for drifters. Sam touched the brim of his hat in greeting, receiving only a curt nod in return. He was used to such welcomes, or lack thereof. Cedar Ridge's main street boasted little more than the essentials. Murphy's General Store, a blacksmith shop that doubled as a stable, Doc Morrison's office with its peeling paint, and at the far end, the Dusty Sage Saloon. It was toward this last establishment that Sam guided his mount, drawn by the promise of whiskey that might wash away the trail dust coating his throat. He tied his horse to the hitching post, patting the animal's neck with surprising gentleness. "Won't be long. Moses," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. The horse snorted, as if understanding that Sam's definition of "not long" was flexible when whiskey was involved. The saloon door swung open with a creak that announced his arrival to the dozen or so patrons inside. Conversations paused momentarily as heads turned to assess the newcomer. Sam had walked into enough saloons to recognize the quick calculations being made. Threat or opportunity. Trouble or just another dusty traveler passing through. The interior was typical of such establishments. Sawdust on the floor to soak up spills and other unsavory liquids. A long bar scarred by years of use. Tables where men played cards with varying degrees of honesty. The air hung thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of spilled beer. Sam made his way to the bar, choosing a spot at the far end where he could keep his back to the wall and an eye on the room. The bartender, a portly man with impressive mustaches waxed to sharp points, ambled over with the unhurried pace of someone who'd long ago learned that hurrying rarely improved anything. "Whiskey," Sam said, placing a worn silver dollar on the bar. The bartender's eyes flicked from the coin to Sam's face, taking in the road-worn appearance and the way Sam's hand never strayed far from the Colt .45 on his hip. Passing through. "That's the plan." Sam's tone didn't invite further conversation. The whiskey arrived in a glass that had seen cleaner days, but Sam had drunk from worse. The first sip burned away the dust and reminded him why he rarely stayed in towns longer than necessary. Towns meant people, and people meant complications he'd spent the better part of 2 decades avoiding. He'd been barely 20 when he'd first taken to the mountain life, driven by reasons he rarely allowed himself to examine too closely. The war had ended, leaving men like him adrift in a world that had moved on, while they were busy dying and killing for causes that seemed less clear with each passing year. Add to that a personal tragedy that had carved out his heart and left a hollow space where hope used to live. And the solitude of the mountains had seemed like salvation rather than exile. For 23 years, he'd trapped beaver until the market died, guided wagon trains until the railroad made him obsolete, hunted buffalo until there were barely any left to hunt. He'd wintered in caves and summers under stars, learning the languages of wind and stone, creek and pine. The mountains had become his church, silence his closest companion. But a man couldn't live on solitude alone, no matter how much he tried. The human animal, it seemed, was cursed with the need for its own kind, even when that need brought nothing but pain. So, periodically, Sam would descend from his mountain retreats, trade his furs or gold dust for supplies, drink enough whiskey to quiet the voices in his head, and disappear again before anyone could get too curious about the man who looked like he'd forgotten how to live among people. This time was different, though he couldn't say exactly why. Maybe it was the way his bones ached when the cold settled in, reminding him that 43 wasn't old for a townsman, but was ancient for a mountain dweller. Maybe it was the dream that had haunted him for months now, a dream of walls that didn't let in wind, of a fire that someone else tended, of voices that weren't just echoes of his own thoughts. You Sam McKenna? The question jolted him from his reverie. A young man, barely out of his teens by the look of him, stood nervously shifting his weight from foot to foot. Sam's hand instinctively moved toward his gun. In his experience, anyone who knew his name without being introduced usually meant trouble. Depends on who's asking. Jake Morrison, Sir Doc Morrison's son. The boy held up his hands in a placating gesture. Got a letter for you. Came through about a month ago, but we didn't know if you'd ever come down to collect it. A letter? Sam couldn't remember the last time anyone had written to him. Anyone who might have cared to was long dead or had given up on him years ago. You sure it's for me? Yes, sir. Samuel Josiah McKenna, originally of Virginia. That's you, ain't it? Sam nodded slowly, accepting the envelope the boy produced from his jacket. The paper was quality, the kind that spoke of money and education. His name was written in precise copperplate script that triggered no memories. Sender paid to have it held for you, Jake added. Said you'd likely show up eventually. Doc's been keeping it in his safe. Sam turned the envelope over in his hands, noting the return address of a law firm in Denver. His stomach tightened. In his experience, lawyers meant either death or trouble, sometimes both. Thank you, he managed, surprising himself with the courtesy. The boy nodded and scurried away, leaving Sam alone with his whiskey and a letter that felt heavier than it should. He didn't open it, not yet. Instead, he ordered another whiskey and let his eyes wander the room. The saloon had filled up as evening approached, miners with ore dust still clinging to their clothes, ranch hands spending their wages before they'd properly earned them, a few merchants and townsmen who preferred the honesty of a saloon to the pretensions of their own parlors. In one corner, a poker game was heating up, voices rising with the stakes. Near the door, a group of cowboys laughed over some joke that probably wasn't as funny as the whiskey made it seem. The piano in the corner remained silent. Cedar Ridge wasn't prosperous enough to afford regular entertainment. Sam had just decided to find a room for the night and deal with the letter in private when the saloon doors burst open with enough force to bang against the walls. The conversations didn't just pause this time. They stopped entirely. The woman who stood in the doorway swayed slightly, gripping the frame for support. Martha Brennan was known throughout Cedar Ridge, though not for reasons that brought her any pride. Somewhere in her 50s. She wore her hard years like a coat that had grown too heavy. Her hair, once probably a handsome auburn, now showed gray at the roots and hung in untidy strands around a face that whiskey had aged beyond its years. "Where's that no-good Bailey?" she called out, her voice carrying the slight slur of afternoon drinking. "Owes me $2 from last week's wash." The bartender sighed. "Haven't seen him today. Martha, why don't you head on home?" "Home?" she laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "What home? That shack that's falling apart faster than I can patch it?" Her bloodshot eyes swept the room, taking in the faces that quickly turned away. Then they landed on Sam. Something in her expression sharpened. She studied him with the calculating look of someone who'd learned to spot opportunity in the unlikeliest places. Sam felt his shoulders tense as she began making her unsteady way toward him. "You," she said, pointing a finger that trembled slightly. You're new. Just passing through, ma'am. Sam turned back to his whiskey, hoping she'd take the hint. She didn't. Instead, she claimed the stool next to him with the determination of someone on a mission. Up close, Sam could see she'd once been handsome, good bones under the weathered skin, eyes that might have sparkled before disappointment dulled them. "Martha Brennan," she announced, extending a hand that Sam reluctantly shook. Widow these past 8 years, thanks to a mine shaft that couldn't hold its own weight. "Sorry for your loss," she waved dismissively. "Ancient history, but you've got the look of a man who knows about loss." She signaled the bartender. "Barney, give me the usual. Put it on." She glanced at Sam. "This gentleman's tab." Sam started to protest, then decided the price of a drink was worth avoiding a scene. Barney poured her a whiskey with the resignation of someone who'd played this scene before. "You married?" Martha asked, downing half her drink in one swallow. "No, ma'am." "Looking to be?" The question was so unexpected that Sam almost choked on his whiskey. "No," he said firmly. "Definitely not." Martha studied him with eyes that were sharper than her intoxicated state suggested. "That's what they all say. But a man your age, living alone, gets cold in winter, doesn't it? Gets quiet, too. So quiet you start talking to yourself just to hear a human voice." Sam's jaw tightened. She'd hit closer to home than she could know. "I've got a daughter," Martha continued, as if she hadn't noticed his discomfort. "Good girl, strong, knows how to work, can cook better than any woman in this town, tends a garden that's the envy of everyone who sees it." "Ma'am, I'm not—" "She's not one of those delicate flowers that wilt at the first sign of hardship," Martha pressed on. "No, sir, my Molly's built sturdy. Some folks—" her voice hardened slightly. "Some folks see that as a fault, but a smart man, a man who's lived rough, he'd see it different. He'd see a woman who won't break when the winter winds blow, who can haul water and chop wood and birth babies without crying for her mama." Sam stood abruptly. "I need to be going." Martha's hand shot out, gripping his sleeve with surprising strength. "Just hear me out. That's all I'm asking. You look like a man who's been alone too long. I can see it in your eyes. Same look my Patrick had when he'd been in the mines too many days straight. And my Molly, she's been alone her whole life, even in a town full of people." "Why?" The question slipped out before Sam could stop it. Martha's face crumpled slightly. "Because people are cruel," she said quietly. "Because she takes after my side of the family. Big-boned, we are strong stock from Ireland. But the young men here, they want those tiny little things they see in the catalog books. All wasp waists and delicate hands. They don't see that those girls would snap like twigs at the first real hardship." She took another drink, and Sam saw her hands were shaking now. "My Molly's 28 years old. 28 and never had a suitor that wasn't playing some cruel joke. You know what that does to a woman? Watching everyone else pair off, have families, while you sit at home with your mother who drinks too much and your needlework that nobody wants to buy." The pain in her voice was real, cutting through the whiskey haze. Sam found himself sitting back down, though he wasn't sure why. "I'm not looking for a wife," he said quietly. "That's what my Patrick said," Martha replied. "Day before he met me, Martha O'Brien," he said when his friend introduced us. "I'm not looking for a wife, but if I was, I'd be looking for you." She smiled at the memory. Married 30 years, until that mine took him. The saloon had gone back to its normal noise level, but Sam felt like he and Martha were in a bubble of uncomfortable intimacy. He'd spent so many years avoiding exactly this kind of conversation, this kind of human connection that came with expectations and complications. "Look," Martha said, seeming to sense his discomfort. "I'm not saying you have to marry her. Just meet her, have dinner with us. One meal. What's the harm in that?" "The harm is giving false hope." Sam said, "I'm not a settling down kind of man." Martha laughed. but it was sad rather than bitter. You think I don't know that? You think I can't spot a runner when I see one? But here's the thing, my Molly doesn't have hope anymore. Hasn't for years. So you can't dash what doesn't exist. She finished her drink and stood, steadying herself against the bar. We live in the yellow house at the end of Maple Street, the one with the garden out front. Dinner's at 6. We'll set a place for you. I won't come, Sam warned. Maybe not, Martha agreed. But we'll set a place anyway. Been setting an extra place for years now. Just in case. What's one more empty chair? She turned to leave, then looked back. You know what the cruelest thing is? My Molly's beautiful. Not in the way this town measures beauty, but in the way that matters. She's got eyes like summer sky and a smile that could light up a room. If anyone ever gave her reason to use it. She's got a heart so big it holds all the hurt this town's given her and still has room for kindness. Martha's voice cracked. But nobody sees it. They look at her and see, well, they see what they want to see. A big girl, Fat Molly, some call her, though never to my face anymore. Not after I took a rolling pin to Vernon Blackwood's head for saying it. She swayed again, and Sam instinctively reached out to steady her. She patted his hand with fingers that were work-rough despite her current state. You've got gentle hands, she observed. For such a hard-looking man, that's good. Molly deserves gentle. With that, she made her way to the door, her dignity intact despite her unsteady gait. The saloon seemed to exhale collectively once she left, conversations resuming with added vigor. Don't mind Martha, Barney said, refilling Sam's glass without being asked. She's been trying to marry off that girl for years. Gets worse when she's in her cups. The daughter really that bad? Sam asked, curious despite himself. Barney shrugged. Depends on what you're looking for. She's big, no denying that, but she's also one of the kindest souls in this town. Helps Doc Morrison with his patients, teaches the little ones their letters when the schoolmarm's sick. Never heard her say an unkind word about anyone, even when He trailed off. Even when they're unkind to her. This isn't always a kind town, Barney said carefully. People get bored. They make their own entertainment. Molly Brennan's been the butt of jokes since she was a girl, but she just keeps on quiet-like, takes care of her mother, tends her garden, helps where she can. Sam stared into his whiskey. He'd come to town for supplies, maybe a night's rest, then back to the mountains. He hadn't come for complications, for dinner invitations, for women with summer sky eyes who'd never been given reason to smile. Yellow house at the end of Maple Street, he murmured. Barney gave him a long look. You're not actually thinking of going? No, Sam said firmly, just making note of places to avoid. But as he finished his drink and headed out to find lodging for the night, he found himself wondering what kind of woman survived years of cruelty with kindness intact. And despite his better judgment, he found himself curious about eyes like summer sky and a face that never smiled. The letter in his pocket crinkled as he walked, reminding him he had his own complications to deal with. Whatever that Denver lawyer wanted, it couldn't be good. Men like Sam didn't get good news from lawyers. But as he passed Maple Street, he found himself glancing down it, noting the yellow house at the end with its garden out front. Even in the dying light, he could see the garden was indeed something special. Rows of late vegetables, flowers still blooming despite the approaching frost. Everything tended with obvious care. He walked on, telling himself he was just heading to the boarding house, just looking for a bed and a chance to read that letter in private. But the image of that garden stayed with him, speaking of patient hands and hope that persisted despite all reason. Just like an empty place set at a dinner table, waiting for someone who might never come. The boarding house bed had been too soft, the walls too close, the sounds of other lodgers too present. Sam had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, the letter from Denver still unopened on the nightstand. When dawn finally crept through the thin curtains, he was almost grateful for the excuse to rise. He'd intended to buy his supplies and leave town before the morning was old. That was the plan. But somehow, As he walked past Maple Street on his way to the general store, his feet had carried him down the dusty lane before his mind could protest. The yellow house sat at the end like a splash of sunshine that had forgotten to fade. Up close, the garden was even more impressive than it had seemed in twilight. Vegetables grew in neat rows, cabbages and turnips, winter squash and carrots. Flowers bloomed between them, marigolds and asters, their colors vivid against the fading green. Everything spoke of careful planning, patient tending, and a refusal to let the approaching winter win without a fight. Sam was so absorbed in studying the garden that he didn't notice the woman until she spoke. "Can I help you?" The voice was soft, carefully modulated, as if the speaker had long practice in not drawing attention. Sam looked up to see a woman standing on the porch, a basket of freshly gathered vegetables in her arms. Martha had been wrong about one thing. Her daughter wasn't 28. She couldn't be more than 25, though something in her eyes made her seem older. And Martha had been right about everything else. Molly Brennan was a large woman. There was no delicate way to put it. She stood nearly as tall as Sam himself, with broad shoulders and a figure that spoke of strength rather than fashion. But it was her face that caught him. Martha had been right about that too. Her eyes were indeed the color of summer sky, clear and bright despite the wariness in them. Her features were pleasant, even pretty high cheekbones, a straight nose, lips that looked like they'd forgotten how to smile but might remember with the right encouragement. Her hair, a rich brown with hints of red, was pulled back in a practical bun that did nothing to hide its thickness. "Miss Brennan," Sam said, removing his hat automatically. "I apologize for trespassing. I was admiring your garden." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that he knew her name. "It's no trouble. Most folks just walk by." She shifted the basket to her hip, the movement practiced and easy despite its weight. "Are you the man from the saloon, the one Mother spoke to yesterday?" Heat crept up Sam's neck. "She mentioned meeting me, did she?" A ghost of a smile touched Molly's lips. There and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. "Mother mentions a lot of things when she's been drinking. I've learned not to put too much stock in it." She paused, studying him with those remarkable eyes. "She set an extra place at dinner last night. I told her not to bother." "You were right," Sam said. "I'm just passing through." That's what they all say. The words might have been bitter, but her tone was matter-of-fact, as if she were observing the weather. "Would you like some vegetables for your travels? I have more than we can use." The offer surprised him. "That's kind of you, but—" "It's not kindness," she interrupted gently. "It's practicality. They'll only go to waste otherwise. Wait here." She disappeared into the house before he could protest, leaving him standing awkwardly by the garden gate. Through the window, he could see her moving around the kitchen with the efficiency of long practice. When she returned, she carried a cloth sack that bulged with produce. "Carrots keep well," she said, handing him the sack. "So do the turnips. The bread is fresh from this morning. There's some preserves too, strawberry, from berries I grew last summer." Sam took the sack, surprised by its weight. "I should pay you for this." "No need, though if you're looking to ease your conscience. The fence post by the back garden is loose. I've been meaning to fix it, but—" She trailed off, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I'll take a look," Sam heard himself saying. He followed her around the house, noting how she moved with surprising grace for her size. She didn't lumber or stomp as he'd seen some large people do, as if apologizing for taking up space. Instead, she moved like someone who'd learned to be comfortable in her own skin, even if the world wasn't comfortable with her. The loose post was an easy fix. While he worked, she brought him water in a tin cup, then stood at a respectful distance, not hovering but available if needed. They didn't speak, but the silence was companionable rather than awkward. "There," Sam said, giving the post a final test wiggle. "Should hold now." "Thank you." She looked at the repaired fence, then at him. "You're handy. That's—" Useful? It was such an understated observation that Sam almost smiled. Years of practice. When you live alone, you learn to fix what's broken or do without. Yes, she said quietly. You do. They stood there for a moment. Two people who understood something about solitude that didn't need explaining. Then the moment broke as the back door slammed open. Molly, where did you... Martha Brennan stopped short, her eyes widening as she took in Sam standing by the fence. Well, I'll be damned. Mother, Molly said, a warning in her tone. Martha ignored it, bustling forward with yesterday's alcohol apparently sweated out and replaced by determined energy. Mr. McKenna, I thought you'd left town. I was admiring your daughter's garden, Sam said carefully. She was kind enough to give me some vegetables for the road. Was she now? Martha's eyes darted between them, calculating. Well, that's our Molly. Generous to a fault. Too generous, some might say. Gives away what she should be selling. Takes care of everyone but herself. Mother! Molly's voice was firmer now, and Sam caught a glimpse of steel beneath the soft exterior. What? I'm just saying. I know what you're saying, and you need to stop. Molly turned to Sam. I apologize for my mother. She means well, but sometimes her meaning gets lost in the delivery. Nothing to apologize for, Sam said. He found himself impressed by how she handled her mother firm but not unkind. Embarrassed but not ashamed. Oh, for heaven's sake, Martha burst out. You two are dancing around each other like it's some kind of barn social. He's here, you're here. It's nearly lunchtime. Molly, invite the man to eat. I don't think, Molly began. I should be going, Sam said at the same time. They looked at each other, and this time her smile lasted long enough for him to be sure of it. It transformed her face, just as her mother had said it would. You should probably run, she said quietly, for his ears alone. Once she gets an idea in her head, she's like a dog with a bone. Speaking from experience. 25 years of it. Molly makes the best stew in the county, Martha announced, apparently deciding to ignore their resistance. And I promise to behave myself. Won't even mention marriage once. Mother! What? I said I wouldn't mention it, though now that I have mentioned it by saying I wouldn't mention it, I suppose that counts as mentioning it, doesn't it? She grinned. Unrepentant. Sam looked at Molly, who had closed her eyes as if praying for patience. When she opened them, she met his gaze directly. You're welcome to stay for lunch, she said simply. No expectations, no ulterior motives, just food and whatever conversation happens naturally. But I'll understand if you need to be on your way. It was the dignity in her voice that decided him. She wasn't begging or manipulating. She was offering what she had with no strings attached, prepared for rejection but not anticipating it. I suppose I could eat, Sam said. Martha clapped her hands. Wonderful. I'll just go check on something. In town. That needs checking. She was gone before either of them could respond, practically sprinting toward the front gate. Molly sighed. She's about as subtle as a stampede. She cares about you. She feels guilty, Molly corrected. She thinks it's her fault I am the way I am. Her blood, her bones, her Irish stock, as she puts it. As if I'm some kind of mistake that needs fixing. Are you? Sam asked. A mistake? She looked at him sharply, searching for mockery and apparently not finding it. No, she said after a moment. I'm just me. That's either enough or it isn't, depending on who's looking. And what do you see when you look? She turned away, busying herself with gathering the tools he'd used. I see someone who grows good vegetables and bakes decent bread and can lift a 50-pound sack of flour without strain. I see someone who knows every child in town by name and can ease their hurts when they fall. I see someone who's useful. That's all. She glanced back at him. What else should there be? Sam thought about all the ways people define themselves. By their losses, their failures, their fears. He thought about how he'd spent 23 years defining himself by what he'd run from rather than what he'd run to. "Maybe that's enough," he said. She studied him for a long moment, those sky-blue eyes seeing more than he was comfortable with. "You're an odd one, Mr. McKenna." "Sam," he said, "and I've been called worse." This time her smile was fuller, more natural. "Well then, Sam, let's see if I can feed you well enough to make up for whatever schemes my mother is undoubtedly hatching in town." As he followed her into the house, Sam caught himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, staying for one meal wouldn't be the disaster he'd anticipated. After all, he'd eaten in worse company, and the vegetables in his sack proved she could cook. What harm could one lunch do? The lunch had stretched into afternoon. Conversation flowing easier than Sam had expected. Molly had a quiet way of drawing out stories, and he'd found himself telling her about places he'd seen, mountains that touched the sky, valleys so green they hurt your eyes, streams so clear you could count the pebbles at the bottom. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she'd been paying attention. Now, as they walked back toward town together, she to deliver preserves to Doc Morrison, he to finally gather his supplies, Sam felt an unfamiliar contentment, the kind that made a man lower his guard. That's when Vernon Blackwood appeared. He came sauntering down Main Street like he owned it, which in a way he did. His father owned the largest ranch in the county. The bank held mortgages on half the properties in town, and Vernon had grown up believing this made him royalty. At 25, he was handsome in the way that money could maintain. Fine clothes, always clean and pressed, boots that had never seen real work, a smile that never quite reached his cold gray eyes. "Well, well," Vernon said, stopping directly in their path. "If it isn't Cedar Ridge's own landmark, how are you today, mighty Molly?" Sam felt Molly tense beside him, though her face remained carefully neutral. "Mr. Blackwood," she said quietly, trying to step around him. Vernon moved to block her again, his smile widening. Now, no need to rush off. I was just telling the boys at the saloon that we ought to enter you in the county fair this year, in the livestock competition. Of course, bet you'd take first prize in the heavyweight category." 2 other young men had drifted over, drawn by the scent of entertainment. They snickered at Vernon's words, emboldened by their leader's cruelty. "That's enough," Sam said quietly. Vernon's attention shifted to him, taking in the travel-worn clothes and mountain man appearance with obvious disdain. "And who might you be? Another of Martha's charity cases? Did she promise you a free meal if you'd walk out with her daughter? How much whiskey did that take?" "I said that's enough." Something in Sam's tone must have penetrated Vernon's arrogance, because the younger man's eyes narrowed. "You're that drifter from the saloon, the one Martha was throwing herself at yesterday? What, decided to sample the goods before you move on?" "Vernon, please," Molly said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just let us pass." "Let you pass?" Vernon laughed, an ugly sound. "But I'm doing you a favor. Molly, warning this poor fellow what he's getting into. Did you tell him about the last man your mother tried to force on you? Poor Tom Garrett. Took 3 bottles of whiskey before he could even look at you. And he still ran for the hills come morning." Sam saw the way Molly's hands clenched in her skirts, the way her shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. He'd seen that posture before, in creatures that had been beaten too often. "You done?" Sam asked, his voice dangerously calm. Vernon mistook the quietness for weakness. "Oh, I'm just getting started. See, it's a public service, really, protecting innocent travelers from—" He never finished the sentence. Sam's fist connected with his jaw with the sound of a hammer hitting meat. Vernon went down hard, expensive clothes meeting dusty street with a satisfying thud. "Vernon!" One of his companions started forward, then stopped as Sam's hand moved to his gun. "Your friend needs to learn some manners," Sam said conversationally. "Might be you do too." Vernon struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip. His handsome face was twisted with rage. "You'll regret that, drifter. My father—" "Your father should have taken a belt to you years ago," Sam interrupted. "Might have taught you how to act like a man instead of a spoiled child who gets his entertainment tormenting those who can't fight back." "Can't fight back," Vernon spat blood. "She's big enough to fight off a grizzly." This time it wasn't Sam who reacted. "Yes," Molly said, stepping forward. Her voice was different now, stronger, carrying an edge Sam hadn't heard before. "I am big. I'm strong. I could probably break you in half if I had a mind to. But I don't, because unlike you, I was raised to be better than my worst impulses." Vernon gaped at her. In all their years of torment, she'd never talked back, never defended herself. "You think you're clever?" she continued, her blue eyes blazing. "You think you're superior because your father has money and you've got a face that photographs well, but you're nothing. Vernon Blackwood, you're a small, petty man who needs to make others feel worthless so you can feel important. That's not strength. That's the worst kind of weakness. You fat—" "Yes," she cut him off. "I'm fat. I'm also kind, hard-working, generous, and loyal. I can birth a calf, bake bread, tend the sick, and grow food from seeds. What can you do, Vernon, besides spend your father's money and torment people who've never done you harm?" The street had gone quiet. People had emerged from shops and businesses, drawn by the commotion. Many of them had witnessed or experienced Vernon's cruelty over the years, but none had ever seen anyone stand up to him like this. Vernon's face had gone from red to purple. "You'll pay for this," he snarled. "Both of you. My father—" "We'll hear about this from me," a new voice interjected. Doc Morrison stepped out of his office, medical bag in hand. "Including how you've been harassing Miss Brennan again, despite my warnings, and how this gentleman was forced to defend her honor when you wouldn't act with common decency." "You taking their side, Doc?" Vernon demanded. "I'm taking the side of human decency," Doc Morrison replied calmly. "Something you might want to acquaint yourself with. Young man, now, I suggest you and your friends move along before Sheriff Watson arrives. I already sent Jake to fetch him." Vernon looked around, seeing faces that weren't as sympathetic as he'd expected. Even his companions seemed uncomfortable, shuffling their feet and avoiding eye contact. "This isn't over," he said finally, but the threat lacked conviction. He turned and stalked away, his friends trailing behind like whipped dogs. The crowd began to disperse, though not without curious glances and whispered conversations. Sam heard fragments. "About time someone stood up to him, and did you hear what she said? And that drifter's got guts." "Miss Brennan," Doc Morrison said gently, "are you all right?" Molly was trembling now, the adrenaline of the moment wearing off. Yes, thank you, Doc." "No need to thank me. You did just fine on your own." He looked at Sam. "You've made an enemy there. Friend. Vernon doesn't forget slights, and neither does his father." "I've had worse enemies," Sam said. Doc Morrison studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you have. Still, might be wise to watch your back while you're in town." He tipped his hat to Molly. "Those preserves can wait until tomorrow. My dear, I think you've had enough excitement for one day." After the doctor left, Sam and Molly stood alone on the street. She was still shaking, arms wrapped around herself as if cold. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "You shouldn't have gotten involved. Vernon will make trouble for you now." "You apologizing for standing up for yourself?" She looked at him, surprised. I've never done that before. Said those things out loud. I've thought them plenty, but never—" Maybe it was time. Maybe. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "But it won't change anything. Tomorrow he'll still be Vernon Blackwood, and I'll still be Fat Molly. That's just how things are." "You're wrong," Sam said. "About what?" "You're not Fat Molly. You're Molly Brennan, who grows gardens and helps doctors and stands up to bullies even when her voice shakes. The rest is just words from small people who need you to be less so they can feel like more." She stared at him for a long moment, and he saw tears gather in those sky-blue eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "You really are an odd one. Sam McKenna," she said finally. "Getting odder by the day, apparently." He offered her his arm. "Let me walk you home." She hesitated, then took it. Her hand on his arm was warm and steady, and if people stared as they walked, Sam found he didn't much care. As they reached the yellow house, Martha came bursting out, having obviously heard some version of events. "Is it true?" she demanded. "Did you really knock Vernon Blackwood on his rear? Did Molly really tell him off in front of half the town?" "Something like that," Sam said. Martha looked between them, taking in Molly's flushed face and the way she still held Sam's arm. "Well, I'll be damned," she said softly. Then, louder, "This calls for a celebration. Sam, you're staying for dinner. No arguments." "Mother—" "No arguments," Martha insisted. "A man defends my daughter's honor. He gets fed. It's the least we can do." Sam looked at Molly, who shrugged slightly. "You might as well give in." She said, "Remember what I said about the dog with a bone?" He thought about the supplies he still hadn't bought, the letter he still hadn't read, the mountains calling him back to solitude and safety. Then he thought about Vernon's ugly words and Molly's brave response, about sky-blue eyes that deserved to smile more often. "I suppose I could eat," he said. Martha beamed. "Of course you could. Molly, start the stove. I'll go tell everyone that someone finally put that Blackwood boy in his place." As Martha hurried off to spread the news, Molly shook her head. "She'll have the whole town knowing by sunset." "Is that a bad thing?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent so long trying to be invisible. Being noticed, it's terrifying." "But—" a small smile touched her lips. "But it felt good. Speaking up, being seen as more than just—" she gestured at herself. "Good," Sam said firmly, "because from where I'm standing, there's plenty worth seeing." She blushed then, a becoming pink that made her look younger. "You really are staying for dinner?" "Appears so, though your mother might be planning our wedding by dessert." "Oh, she's already planning that," Molly said, then clapped a hand over her mouth. "I didn't mean—" Sam surprised himself by laughing. "It's fine. Takes more than an ambitious mother to trap me into something I don't want." "And what do you want?" she asked softly. He considered the question. This morning he'd wanted supplies and solitude. Now, right now, I want to see what you're cooking for dinner. The rest can sort itself out. It wasn't much of an answer, but she seemed to accept it. As they went inside, Sam caught himself thinking that sometimes a man's wants could change without him noticing. And sometimes, just sometimes, that might not be a bad thing. The days that followed took on a rhythm Sam hadn't experienced in decades. He'd rented a room at the boarding house, but found himself spending more time at the yellow house on Maple Street than anywhere else. What had started as fixing a fence post had grown into a list of repairs the Brennan household needed. Loose floorboards, a leak in the roof, shutters that hung crooked after too many winter storms. "You don't have to do all this," Molly said for the 100th time, watching as he worked on replacing rotted boards on the front porch. "I know," Sam replied, not looking up from his work. "Hand me that hammer, would you?" She passed it to him, their fingers brushing briefly. These small touches had become more frequent, each one sending an unexpected warmth through him that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. "Most folks would have left town by now," she observed. "Especially after making an enemy of Vernon Blackwood. Most folks haven't tasted your apple pie." She laughed, a sound he'd been hearing more often lately. "So you're staying for my cooking?" "Among other things." The words hung between them, heavier with meaning than he'd intended. Sam focused on the board, aware of her watching him. "I need to check on the bread," she said finally. but he heard the smile in her voice after she'd gone inside. Sam sat back on his heels and surveyed his work. The house was looking better, more solid. Like its occupants, it had good bones under the neglect. Martha had sobered up considerably since his arrival, as if having a man around the house had given her a reason to pull herself together. She still drank, but not to excess, and she'd taken to disappearing on long errands that gave him and Molly time alone. Not that they did anything improper with that time. They talked, mostly, or worked in companionable silence. Sam had learned that Molly read every book she could get her hands on, that she knew the Latin names of plants, that she'd once dreamed of being a teacher before accepting that the town would never hire someone who looked like her to shape young minds. In turn, he'd told her things he hadn't spoken of in years. His childhood in Virginia before the war, his first winter in the mountains, when he'd nearly died from cold and stupidity, the beauty of sunrise from a peak so high the clouds looked like ocean waves below. He hadn't told her about the war itself, or about Mary, or about the child who'd died with her. Some wounds ran too deep for words, even with someone who listened like Molly did. Mr. McKenna? Sam looked up to find Jake Morrison standing by the gate, fidgeting with obvious discomfort. "Doc needs you," the boy said. "There's been an accident at the Hendrickson farm. Says to bring Miss Molly, too, if she's willing." Sam was on his feet immediately. "What kind of accident?" "Barn collapsed. Mr. Hendrickson's trapped under the beams. Doc says it's bad." Molly appeared in the doorway, already reaching for her shawl. "I heard. Let me get the medical supplies I keep here." They made the 3-mile journey to the Hendrickson farm in Doc Morrison's wagon, Molly sitting between Sam and the doctor, a basket of supplies on her lap. Sam watched her hands as they checked and rechecked the contents. Steady hands, competent hands, hands that knew their business. The scene at the farm was chaos. Half the barn had collapsed, and men from neighboring farms were working frantically to clear debris. Women clustered nearby, some crying, others organizing water and bandages. "There," Doc Morrison pointed. "They've almost got him clear." Sam joined the men working to lift the beams, while Molly and Doc Morrison prepared for the worst. It took 6 of them to move the main beam that had pinned Carl Hendrickson's legs. The man screamed when they lifted it, a sound that sent Sam back to battlefields he'd tried to forget. "Careful now," Doc Morrison directed as they carried Hendrickson to where he'd set up a makeshift treatment area. "Molly, I need you to—" "Already on it," she said, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She'd tied her sleeves back, revealing strong forearms as she worked to cut away Hendrickson's ruined trousers. Sam watched her work alongside the doctor, amazed at her transformation. Gone was the shy woman who apologized for taking up space. In her place was someone confident, skilled, essential. She anticipated Doc Morrison's needs, handing him tools before he asked, applying pressure where needed, speaking soothingly to Hendrickson when the pain made him thrash. "Hold him steady," Doc Morrison commanded, and Sam found himself at Hendrickson's shoulders, keeping the man still while the doctor worked to set badly broken bones. "You're doing fine, Carl," Molly said, wiping sweat from the injured man's brow. "Think about Elsie. Think about your boys. They need you to fight through this." It took 2 hours to stabilize Hendrickson enough to move him into the house. By then, Molly's dress was stained with blood and dirt. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and she looked exhausted. But she kept working, helping to settle the patient, preparing medicines, instructing Elsie Hendrickson on his care. "He'll make it," Doc Morrison said quietly to the assembled group. "Thanks to quick work and capable hands." He looked pointedly at Molly. "I couldn't have managed without you, my dear." "Anyone would have helped," Molly said, but Sam saw the pleased flush on her cheeks. "No," Elsie Hendrickson said firmly. "Not anyone. You knew exactly what to do. You saved my Carl's life." As they prepared to leave, several of the farm wives approached Molly, women who'd previously kept their distance, who'd whispered behind their hands when she passed. Now they pressed her hands, thanked her, asked her advice about poultices and tinctures. On the ride back to town, Doc Morrison was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "You know, I'm not getting any younger. Been thinking about taking on an assistant, someone who could help with house calls, handle things when I'm laid up with my rheumatism." Molly's hand stilled on the basket. "Doc?" "The pay wouldn't be much," he continued. "But it's steady work, respectable work, if you're interested." Yes, I'm interested." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Good. Come by tomorrow, and we'll work out the details." He glanced at Sam. "Assuming this fellow doesn't have other plans for you." "Doc!" Molly's face went scarlet. The older man chuckled. "Just observing. Man doesn't fix up a house for no reason." Sam kept his eyes on the road, but he was aware of Molly beside him, could feel the warmth radiating from her despite the cooling evening air. "A house needs maintaining," he said carefully. "Otherwise it falls apart." "Indeed it does," Doc Morrison agreed. "Indeed it does." They dropped the doctor at his office. Then Sam drove Molly home. Martha was waiting on the porch, having heard the news through the mysterious communication network that connected every household in the county. "Is it true?" she demanded. "Carl Hendrickson nearly died, and my Molly helped save him?" "It's true," Sam confirmed, helping Molly down from the wagon. She swayed slightly, exhaustion catching up with her, and he steadied her with a hand at her waist. "I need to wash. Molly said, I'm a mess." "You're beautiful," Sam said, the words escaping before he could stop them. She froze, looking up at him with those sky-blue eyes wide with shock. Martha made a small sound that might have been a squeal quickly suppressed. "I mean," Sam started, then stopped. What did he mean? "I mean, you did beautiful work today. Watching you with Doc Morrison, seeing how you handled everything. It was something to see." "Oh." She looked down at her blood-stained dress, then back at him. "Thank you." Doc offered her a job. Sam told Martha, desperate to shift focus from his slip. "As his assistant." "A job?" Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Molly. Oh, my dear girl." "It's not that big," Molly began, but her mother cut her off with a fierce hug. "Yes, it is. It's everything. It's people seeing what I've always known, that you're special, that you're needed." Sam left them to their celebration, heading to the boarding house to clean up and think. But thinking proved dangerous. He kept seeing Molly as she'd been today, competent, confident, glowing with purpose. Kept remembering the feel of her waist under his hand, the way she'd looked at him when he'd called her beautiful. He'd been in Cedar Ridge for 2 weeks now. His supplies were purchased, sitting in his room waiting to be loaded. The letter from Denver remained unopened, a problem for another day. He could leave tomorrow, head back to his mountains and his solitude. But he knew he wouldn't. Because somewhere between fixing fence posts and sharing meals, between standing up to bullies and watching her save a man's life, Sam McKenna had done the one thing he'd sworn never to do again. He'd started to care, and that terrified him more than any enemy he'd ever faced. That evening, he returned to the Yellow House for dinner as had become his custom. Molly had bathed and changed, her hair pinned up neatly again. But there was something different about her, a new confidence in the way she moved, a brightness to her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking," she said as she served the meal, "about what Doc Morrison said, about being his assistant." "It's a good opportunity," Sam said. "It is, but it's also scary. What if I'm not good enough? What if people won't accept me in that role?" "You were good enough today," Sam pointed out, "and those farm wives seem to accept you just fine." "That was different. That was an emergency." "No," Martha interjected. "Sam's right. Today people saw the real you, the one we've always seen, the one that fool Vernon Blackwood tried to hide with his cruel words." Molly smiled at her mother, then at Sam. "Maybe you're right. maybe things can change. Things are already changing, Sam said quietly. She met his eyes across the table, and something passed between them. An understanding, a possibility, a future neither had expected. Yes, she said softly. They are. Outside, night settled over Cedar Ridge, bringing with it the first real cold of autumn. But inside the yellow house, warmed by food and companionship and something that might have been the beginning of love, nobody noticed the chill. The mine whistle's shriek cut through the afternoon air like a knife. 3 long blasts followed by 3 short ones, the signal everyone in Cedar Ridge dreaded. Cave in. Sam was helping Molly organize medical supplies in Doc Morrison's office when they heard it. She went white, dropping the bottle of laudanum she'd been holding. That's the consolation mine, she breathed. Oh God, that's where half the town works. Doc Morrison was already grabbing his bags. Molly, get all the bandages we have. Sam, run to the church. They'll be setting up there for the wounded. Tell them we'll need tables. Hot water. Lots of it. The next hours blurred together in a nightmare of dust, blood, and desperate voices. The Consolation Mine had been the town's largest employer, and the cave-in had trapped 23 men in the lower shaft. By the time Sam arrived at the mine site, dozens of people had gathered, wives, children, friends of the trapped miners. We need every able-bodied man. The mine foreman shouted. Got to shore up the rescue shaft before we can get to them. Sam joined the rescue efforts, working alongside men he'd only nodded to on the street. Vernon Blackwood was there too. Surprisingly, his fine clothes discarded for work gear. Their eyes met once across the chaos. But this wasn't the time for petty grudges. Down in the mine, the air was thick with dust and the groaning of stressed timbers. Sam had been in tight spaces before, but nothing like this. The weight of the mountain pressing down. The knowledge that one wrong move could bring everything crashing down on them. Easy there. A grizzled miner named Murphy guided him. Listen to the mountain. She'll tell you what she's planning if you pay attention. They worked in shifts, 2 hours down, 1 hour up to let others take their place. Each time Sam emerged, he looked for Molly among the crowd of helpers. She was always there, moving between the injured with Doc Morrison, her dress now permanently stained, her face drawn with exhaustion but determined. It was during his 3rd shift below that they broke through. The trapped miners were huddled in an air pocket, some injured, all terrified, but alive. The cheer that went up when they emerged could probably be heard in the next county. Molly! One of the rescued miners, a young man named Thomas, called out. Is Molly Brennan here? My Sarah, she's having the baby. Started when the whistle blew. She needs... Molly was already moving. Doc Morrison calling after her. Take Sam with you. I can't spare anyone else. And you might need help. Sam found himself running through the streets beside her, carrying the medical bag while she held up her skirts to move faster. The Thomas house was in chaos when they arrived. Sarah Thomas was deep in labor, attended by a neighbor woman who looked relieved to see them. Thank God, the woman said. It's coming too fast, and something's not right. Molly took charge immediately, examining Sarah with gentle but efficient hands. The baby's turned wrong, she said to Sam. I need to... She looked at him, seeming to realize for the first time that he was the only one there to help. I need you to hold her steady. Can you do that? Sam had seen plenty of death in his time, but birth was another matter entirely. Still, he nodded, moving to support Sarah as Molly directed. You're doing fine, Molly soothed the laboring woman. Your Thomas is safe. I saw him myself, walking out on his own 2 feet. Now we need to get this baby here to meet him. What followed was the longest hour of Sam's recent memory. Molly worked with a calm intensity, her hands sure despite the difficulties. She talked Sarah through each contraction, adjusted the baby's position with infinite patience, never showing the fear Sam could see in her eyes when things got complicated. Now, she said finally, Sarah, now you push. The baby came in a rush of fluid and sound. A tiny girl who announced her arrival with impressive lungs. Molly caught her expertly, cleared her airways, and placed her on Sarah's chest. "She's perfect," Molly said, and Sam saw tears on her cheeks. "Absolutely perfect." It wasn't until they were walking back to the church, where the rescue efforts were winding down, that Molly's composure cracked. She stopped suddenly, leaning against a fence post, shaking. "Molly?" Sam touched her shoulder gently. "I've never delivered a baby alone before," she whispered. "Always had Doc Morrison there. What if I'd done something wrong? What if—" "You didn't," Sam said firmly. "You were magnificent. That woman and her baby are alive because of you." She looked up at him, those blue eyes swimming with tears and exhaustion and something else. "You helped. You didn't have to, but you stayed." "Where else would I be?" The simple question seemed to break something open in her. She swayed toward him, and Sam caught her, pulling her against his chest. She fit there perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, her body solid and warm against his. "I'm so tired," she murmured into his shirt. "I know. Let's get you home." But when they reached the yellow house, they found it wasn't to be a quiet evening. Half the town seemed to have gathered there, bringing food for the rescue workers, sharing news of the saved miners. Martha was in her element, organizing everything with the efficiency of a general. 17 rescued without serious injury," she announced when she saw them. 4 with broken bones that Doc's tending, 2 still unaccounted for. Her face softened as she took in Molly's exhausted state. "And I heard about the Thomas baby, born healthy despite everything." The evening became a blur of neighbors coming and going. Women who'd barely acknowledged Molly before now sought her out, asking about the birth, about the rescue efforts, about her new position with Doc Morrison. Men nodded respectfully to Sam, including him in their conversations about the mine's safety and the town's future. Vernon Blackwood appeared at one point, his face and clothes black with coal dust. He stood awkwardly at the door until Martha waved him in. "Don't just stand there," she scolded. "Heroes don't lurk in doorways." Vernon's eyes found Molly across the room. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then he crossed to where she sat, Sam tensing beside her. "Miss Brennan," Vernon said stiffly. "I heard what you did today, at the mine and with the Thomas baby." He swallowed hard. I owe you an apology for everything, for years of being less than a man should be." Molly studied him, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Vernon. That took courage to say." He shifted uncomfortably. "My cousin was one of the trapped miners. When I thought he might die down there, well, it puts things in perspective. What matters and what doesn't." He glanced at Sam. "I owe you an apology too." Sam extended his hand. Vernon took it, the handshake brief but firm. After Vernon left, the gathering gradually wound down. People drifted home, exhausted but grateful. The 2 missing miners had been found alive, trapped in a pocket they'd dug themselves. The Consolation mine would need major repairs, but no one had died. In a mining town, that counted as a miracle. Finally, only Sam and the Brennan women remained. They sat on the porch despite the cool night, none of them ready to be confined by walls after the day's events. "Feels like everything changed today," Martha said quietly. "The whole town feels different." "Crisis has a way of showing what really matters," Sam observed. "And what matters to you, Sam McKenna?" Molly asked, her voice soft in the darkness. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the question. This morning he'd been a drifter helping with repairs, still planning eventually to return to his mountains. Tonight, today, when I couldn't find you in the crowd at first, he said slowly. When I didn't know if you were safe, I realized something. "What?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "That somewhere in these past weeks, Cedar Ridge stopped being just another town. It became the place where you are. And that matters more than I expected anything to matter again." He heard her sharp intake of breath, felt Martha quietly slip inside to give them privacy. "Sam, I know I'm not what you deserve," he continued. "I'm old, set in my ways, carrying ghosts I can't shake. But watching you today, seeing your strength, your compassion, the way this town is finally seeing what I've seen all along. Molly, She kissed him. It was awkward at first. Neither of them experienced in such things recently. But then his arms came around her, and her hands found his face. And it became something else entirely. Something that spoke of loneliness ending, of hope beginning, of two people finding in each other what they'd stopped looking for. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Molly was smiling in a way that transformed her whole face. "You were saying?" she prompted. Sam laughed, surprising himself. "I was saying that I love you. Molly Brennan, God help me, I do." "Good," she said simply. "Because I love you too, Sam McKenna, ghosts and all." They sat together on the porch swing, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her solid warmth. Above them, stars appeared one by one in the clear mountain sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the mind to repair, the injured to tend, a town to rebuild. But tonight, they had this, each other, and the knowledge that sometimes, from the deepest darkness, the brightest lights could emerge. "Stay," Molly said quietly. "Not just tonight, not just for another week. Stay." Sam pressed a kiss to her hair, breathing in the scent of lavender soap and honest work. "Yes," he said simply, "yes." And in that moment, he meant it with everything he had. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a special courier who looked out of place in Cedar Ridge with his city clothes and impatient manner. Sam had just finished helping Molly prepare Doc Morrison's office for the day when Jake burst in. "Sam, there's a fancy man at the boarding house asking for you. Says it's urgent." The fancy man turned out to be a lawyer's clerk from Denver, the same firm whose letter Sam had been carrying unopened for weeks. There was no avoiding it now. "Mr. Samuel McKenna?" the clerk asked, eyeing Sam's work clothes with poorly concealed disdain. "I'm instructed to wait while you read this documentation and return with your response." Sam took the thick envelope with reluctant hands. "Give me an hour." He found himself at the yellow house, sitting at Molly's kitchen table while she made coffee with worried glances in his direction. Finally, he opened both letters, the old one and the new. The words swam before his eyes. His Uncle Josiah, whom he barely remembered, had died without immediate heirs. The estate's substantial lands in Colorado, mining interests, bank accounts, had been left to Sam as the last living McKenna of that line. The sum mentioned made his head spin. "Sam?" Molly's gentle voice brought him back. "What is it?" He handed her the letters wordlessly, watched as her eyes widened, as understanding dawned. "This is, Sam, this is a fortune. You're rich." "I don't want it," he said immediately. "But I came here with nothing but what I could carry. I was happy with that. I'm happy now, here, with you. I don't need—" "Sam," she took his hands in hers, "this isn't about need. It's about what you do with it. Think of the good you could accomplish." He looked at their joined hands, hers work-rough and strong, his scarred from years of mountain living. Or think of how it could change everything, how people would look at us differently, how they'd look at you differently. Understanding flickered in her eyes. "You mean how they'd suddenly find me acceptable? The fortune hunter who caught herself a rich husband? That's not what you are. I know that. You know that. But others—" She sighed. "Sam, you can't make decisions based on what cruel people might say. You never have before." She was right, of course. But the thought of their simple life here becoming complicated by wealth and attention made his stomach churn. He'd seen what money did to people, how it twisted relationships and bred false friends. "There's more," he said quietly. "The lawyer says there are people contesting the will. Distant cousins, business partners. If I accept, I'll have to go to Denver, maybe for weeks. There'll be court proceedings, documents to sign. Then we'll go together. Molly, unless—" her voice became very quiet. "Unless you'd rather go alone. Unless this inheritance gives you a way to leave that you've been looking for." The pain in her voice cut through him. "No," he said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. "No, that's not— Molly, I love you. This doesn't change that." "Doesn't it?" She pulled back to look at him. "Sam, you could go anywhere now. Do anything. Be with anyone. Why would you stay in a little mining town with a woman like me when the whole world just opened up to you?" He cupped her face in his hands. "Because you're home," he said simply. "Because the whole world doesn't mean anything if you're not in it." She searched his eyes, then kissed him softly. "Then we'll face this together. Whatever you decide." The clerk was growing impatient by the time Sam returned. "Well, will you be accompanying me to Denver? I need a few days to arrange things here." The clerk's face pinched with disapproval. "Mr. McKenna, I must stress the urgency. Every day you delay gives the contestants more time to—" "Then they'll have more time," Sam interrupted. "I have responsibilities here. A few days won't matter in the grand scheme." After the clerk left, muttering about stubborn mountain men, Sam found himself walking the streets of Cedar Ridge with new eyes. If he accepted the inheritance, he could help rebuild the mine safely, fund Doc Morrison's clinic properly, fix every failing business on Main Street. Or he could destroy the delicate life he'd built here. Money had a way of doing that. "Sam," Vernon Blackwood called out from across the street. Since the mine rescue, he'd been different, quieter, more thoughtful. Now he crossed over, falling into step beside Sam. "Heard there was a Denver lawyer looking for you. Everything all right?" Sam considered how to answer. Vernon's family had money. He might understand. "Unexpected inheritance," he said finally, trying to decide if it's a blessing or a curse. Vernon laughed. "But it wasn't unkind. Both, usually. My father inherited his fortune from his father, and I've watched what it did to him. Made him hard, suspicious of everyone's motives. Made him think money could solve everything, even the problems it created. And you—" "I'm trying to be different." Vernon kicked at a stone. "The mine collapse showed me what really matters. My cousin would have died if not for men like you risking their lives. Can't buy that kind of courage." They walked in silence for a moment before Vernon spoke again. "You know what the biggest curse of money is? It makes you doubt every relationship. Are they here for you or for what you can give them?" Sam thought of Molly, of her worried eyes and steady hands. "Some people you don't have to doubt." "No," Vernon agreed. "Some people you don't. Hold on to those ones. Sam, they're worth more than any fortune." That evening, Sam found the yellow house in an uproar. Word had somehow spread small towns had no secrets, and Martha was fielding visitors with the ferocity of a guard dog. "No, Mrs. Henderson. We don't know the details. Yes, Mrs. Murphy. Sam's still the same man. No, Vernon Blackwood. You can't speak to him about a business proposition." Sam slipped in the back door, finding Molly in the kitchen, calmly making bread while chaos reigned in the parlor. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "About an hour." She didn't look up from her kneading. "Amazing how fast news travels. Mrs. Pritchard actually asked if we'd be too good for the town now." "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. Mother hit her with a dish rag before I could answer." Despite everything, Sam found himself smiling. "Your mother's something else." "She's protective." Molly paused in her work. "She's also terrified." "Of what?" "That you'll leave. That I'll leave with you. That she'll be alone again." Molly's hand stilled on the dough. "She's not the only one who's terrified." Sam moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. I'm not going anywhere without you. Promise. Promise. She leaned back against him, flour-dusted hands coming to rest on his arms. Then we'll figure this out. Together. A crash from the parlor interrupted them, followed by Martha's voice raised in indignation. They looked at each other and laughed, the sound easing the tension that had building all day. Should we rescue your mother? Sam asked. In a minute, Molly said, turning in his arms. First, I need you to kiss me and remind me that we're still us, no matter what numbers are written on those papers. He obliged, kissing her thoroughly until they were both breathless and covered in flour. When they finally parted, some of the worry had left her eyes. Still us, he confirmed. Good. Now let's go save Mother before she declares war on the entire town. They found Martha facing down a small crowd of neighbors, brandishing a rolling pin like a weapon. The next person who asks about Sam's money gets this upside the head. Mother, Molly said mildly, put the rolling pin down. They're like vultures, Martha protested, circling already, and the man hasn't even decided what to do yet. Sam stepped forward, addressing the gathered crowd. Folks, I appreciate your interest, but nothing's been decided. When and if there's anything to share, you'll hear it. For now, I'd appreciate some privacy to think things through. Most had the grace to look ashamed, mumbling apologies as they filed out. But Sam caught the calculating looks, the whispered conversations. The inheritance was already changing things, just as he'd feared. That night, unable to sleep, he sat on the boarding house steps and finally made his decision, not based on fear or what others might think, but on what felt right. He'd accept the inheritance, not for himself, but for what it could do for Cedar Ridge, for Molly, for the life they were building together. And if people talked, if they doubted or schemed or judged, well, he'd weathered worse storms than gossip. The next morning, he found Molly in Doc Morrison's office, preparing medicines with her usual careful attention. She looked up when he entered, reading his decision in his face. You're going to accept it? Yes, but on my terms, and only if you'll come to Denver with me. She set down the bottle she was holding. Sam, I can't just leave. Doc Morrison needs... I need you, he said simply. And I spoke to Doc this morning. He thinks the trip would be educational for you. Chances to visit hospitals, attend medical lectures. He's calling it part of your training. You arranged this? I asked. He agreed. Said he could manage for a few weeks with help from the other towns. Sam took her hands. I won't do this without you, Molly. We face it together or not at all. She was quiet for a long moment, then squeezed his hands. Together, then, though heaven knows what Denver society will make of us. Let them make what they will, Sam said. We know who we are. Yes, she agreed, and her smile was like sunrise. We do. The clerk, when informed, was visibly relieved. Arrangements were made for the journey. Doc Morrison gave his blessing along with a list of medical contacts in Denver, and Martha alternated between tears and fierce pride. As Sam packed his few belongings, the weight of change settled on his shoulders. But alongside the uncertainty was something else. Hope. For the first time in 23 years, he was choosing to walk toward something instead of away. And he wouldn't be walking alone. The Denver trip had been a revelation. For 3 weeks, Sam had navigated lawyers and ledgers while Molly attended medical lectures and visited hospitals. They'd faced down sneering society matrons and grasping relatives with equal determination. And when the dust settled, Sam had not only secured his inheritance, but also established a trust for Cedar Ridge funds for the mine's safety improvements, the clinic's expansion, and the town's first proper school. Now they were home, standing once again in the garden of the Yellow House. But everything had changed. Vernon Blackwood had organized a welcome party that filled Main Street. The very people who'd once mocked Molly now sought her medical advice and hung on her stories of Denver's great hospitals. It's strange, Molly said quietly, watching the celebration from the porch. All my life I wanted them to see me as something more than Fat Molly. Now they do, and I realize it doesn't matter as much as I thought. Sam wrapped an arm around her shoulders. What matters then? You, Mother, Doc Morrison, the work I do, the people who saw me before Denver, before the money. She leaned into him. The rest is just noise. Wise woman. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I love you. Even though I knocked over that fancy vase in the lawyer's office? Especially because of that. His face was priceless. She laughed, the sound drawing Martha over. The older woman had been sober for 2 weeks now, her eyes clearer than Sam had ever seen them. You two planning to stand out here all night? Martha asked. The whole town's waiting to toast the happy couple. We're not, Molly began. Yet, Sam interrupted. He turned to face Molly fully, his heart pounding like he was a young man again. But we could be. Molly's eyes widened. Sam? He'd planned to do this differently, privately, but somehow this felt right, here in the garden she'd tended so faithfully, with her mother beaming and the town celebrating in the distance. Molly Brennan, he said, dropping to one knee right there on the porch. You've shown me that a man can start over. That home isn't a place, but a person. You've made me want to be better than I am, to build something lasting instead of always running. Will you marry me? He pulled out the ring he'd bought in Denver, not the flashiest one the jeweler had shown him, but a simple band with a small sapphire that matched her eyes. Oh, Sam, Molly breathed, tears streaming down her face. Yes, of course, yes. Her hands shook as he slipped the ring on her finger. Then she was pulling him up, kissing him soundly while Martha whooped loud enough to draw attention from the street. Did she say yes? Someone called out. She said yes, Martha shouted back, and a cheer went up that could probably be heard in the next county. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and plans. Vernon Blackwood, now genuinely reformed and working to make amends for years of cruelty, offered to host the wedding reception. Doc Morrison volunteered to give the bride away. The whole town, it seemed, wanted to be part of their happiness. But it was later, when the crowds had dispersed and they sat alone on the porch swing, that Sam felt the true weight of the moment. Are you sure? He asked quietly. I'm not an easy man. Molly, I've got my moods, my silences. Sometimes the mountains still call to me. Then we'll visit the mountains, she said simply. Sam, I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for real. For someone who sees me truly and chooses to stay anyway. Like you see me. Exactly like that. They were married 2 months later, on a crisp December day with snow dusting the mountains like sugar. The church was packed, people standing in the aisles and spilling out the doors. Molly wore a dress of deep blue that Martha and the ladies' sewing circle had made, and Sam had never seen anything more beautiful. Doc Morrison walked her down the aisle, his eyes suspiciously wet. Take care of her, he whispered to Sam. With my life, Sam promised. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but Sam felt each one in his bones. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, when he kissed Molly to the applause of the entire town, something inside him finally settled. The restlessness that had driven him for 23 years quieted at last. The reception at Vernon's family ranch was lavish by Cedar Ridge standards. Food covered every surface, musicians played, and people danced until their feet hurt. Sam even managed a few turns around the floor with his bride, though he warned her his dancing was rustier than his hinges. You're doing fine, she laughed as they swayed together. Everything's perfect. Even my stepping on your feet. Especially that, it means you're trying. As the evening wore on, Sam found himself on the porch with Vernon, of all people, sharing a drink and watching the festivities through the window. Never thought I'd see the day. Vernon said, me hosting Molly Brennan's wedding reception. Life takes strange turns. That it does. Vernon was quiet for a moment. I'm glad she found you. Glad you both found each other. Makes me think maybe there's hope for all of us." "There is," Sam said. "Just takes being willing to change." Later, as he and Molly prepared to leave for their wedding night at the best hotel in town, a gift from the grateful miners whose lives he'd helped save, the crowd gathered to see them off. "Be happy," Martha said, hugging them both fiercely. "Be so happy it makes up for all the years that weren't." "We will," Molly promised. As they drove away in a borrowed carriage decorated with ribbons and bells, Sam took his wife's hand. Wife. The word still felt foreign but right. "No regrets?" Molly asked. "Only one." Her face fell. "What?" "That it took me so long to find you." She laughed, the sound bright in the cold night air. "Better late than never." "Much better," he agreed. They spent their wedding night talking as much as anything else, planning their future. The old cabin Sam had started building at the edge of town. Close enough for Molly to continue working with Doc Morrison, but far enough for the quiet Sam still sometimes craved, the children they hoped for, the ways they'd use the inheritance to help the town without letting it change who they were. "I want our children to know both worlds," Molly said, curled against his side. "The mountains you love and the community I cherish. I want them to be strong and kind, practical and compassionate, like their mother, and brave and principled like their father." Sam pulled her closer, marveling at the solid warmth of her, the reality of this moment. "I love you, Mrs. McKenna, and I love you, Mr. McKenna, forever." Outside their hotel window, snow began to fall, blanketing Cedar Ridge in white. It covered the mine and the yellow house, the church and the saloon, making everything clean and new. A fresh start, Sam thought, for all of them. In the morning, they'd return to real life. There would be challenges. There always were. People who still doubted, problems money couldn't solve. The daily work of building a life together. But tonight, they had this, each other, and the promise of all the years to come. "You know what?" Molly said sleepily. "What?" Mother was right. Sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places. A drunk woman's matchmaking, a drifter's arrival, a mine collapse, an inheritance, a garden that needed admiring, Sam added. "Yes," she agreed. "That too." They fell asleep like that, entwined and content, while outside the snow continued to fall. In the morning, Cedar Ridge would wake to a world transformed, white and pristine and full of possibility. Just like the life Sam McKenna and Molly Brennan McKenna were building together, unexpected, imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. The yellow house stood empty that night, but Martha didn't mind. She sat by her window, sober and smiling, watching the snow fall and thinking about grandchildren who'd run through that garden, strong and sturdy and loved beyond measure. Down at the saloon, Barney polished glasses and told anyone who'd listen about the day Martha Brennan had dragged in a mountain man and changed the course of 3 lives. And in their hotel room, Sam held his wife close and thanked whatever force had driven him down from the mountains to this place. This woman, this life he'd never dared imagine could be his. "Forever?" he whispered into the darkness. "Forever," she confirmed. And in Cedar Ridge, where the mountains met the valley and broken souls found healing, forever seemed not only possible, but promised.